So, welcome everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to be hosting this Avid Reader event this evening. And I would just like to say I'm very excited. We're getting closer to the end of the year, but I mean, just sort of imagine yourselves out on the back deck of Avid Reader if you have had the pleasure of having a being at an Avid event. And as Poppy will know, probably it's nice and balmy, and we've got beautiful bird calls and surrounded by some flowers and bougainvillea. Um, so what we're talking about tonight in this special conversation event is Writing Tasmania with Poppy G and Kyle Perry. My name is Bianca and I'll be your avid host for this evening. And so firstly, just some housekeeping. If you haven't attended an online event with Avid Reader before, I'll just reiterate a couple of things that were sent on an email with the link you received. There is a chat function built into Zoom that you can use to chat with me directly throughout the event. And when we call for audience questions, this is where you can type them in also, and then I'll read them out aloud. Please feel free to send through your questions at any time. One important note I'll pass on shortly in the chat is the link to where you can purchase your copy of Kyle and Poppy's books. And so I'll pop those through in a moment. And for the next 24 hours, you can use the code EVENT, that's just EVENT, to receive 10% off any books you order online with Avid Reader. So just letting some more people in. Okay, and welcome to those who are just joining us. Thank you. So for the tech side of things tonight, because everyone's computer or device will have different settings for Zoom, we can't offer technical support. And please note that all of you will be placed on mute for the conversation and the Q&A section. However, as I said, use that chat function to send through your questions. And at the end, we'll be able to get everyone to unmute themselves so we can join in thanking our special guests this evening. And so I'll officially start our event with an acknowledgement of country. So please join me from wherever you may be tonight to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land. From where I call home, Meanjin, I pay respect to the Yuggera and Turrbal people and to all elders past, present and emerging. I acknowledge that this land has always been and will always be Aboriginal land and a place of creativity, community, and storytelling. Tonight, Tasmanian born and bred writers Kyle Perry and Poppy G join forces to discuss their literary thrillers, both set in pristine central Tasmania. They'll talk tonight about mystery and crime in the Apple Isle and why a beautiful wilderness might be the perfect place to bury a body. I couldn't resist that introduction for our event. So I'd now like to introduce Poppy and Kyle. So Poppy grew up in Launceston and comes from a big Tasmanian family of farmers, environmentalists and loggers, which makes family gatherings very interesting. You can imagine. Lots of debates. She lives in Brisbane with her husband and 3 kids. A former journalist, Poppy has worked as a sub-editor at the Courier Mail, chief sub-editor at Girlfriend magazine, and has taught journalism at QUT. Vanishing Falls is Poppy's second novel. Her first novel, literary thriller Bay of Fires, was set on Tasmania's east coast. Thank you, Poppy, for joining us. And Kyle, who's also with us tonight, is a counsellor who has worked extensively in high schools, youth shelters, and drug rehabs. In his work, he encounters stories and journeys that would fill 100 books. Kyle's mother grew up in the foothills of the Great Western Tiers in Tasmania's heartland, where his grandfather was called on for search and rescues in the mountains. Kyle himself has been lost in Tasmanian mountains twice, although he tells us that, it's a couple more times, but those were the 2 memorable ones, and once used ripped pages of a journal stuck on branches to find his way back out. He has also seen strange things in the bush that defy explanation. And The Bluffs is his debut novel. And congratulations also, Kyle, for being listed for the Indie Book Awards as well. So a very warm Avid Reader welcome to Poppy and Kyle. And Poppy, I'll pass over to you.
Thank you, Bianca, and thank you everyone for taking time this evening to join Kyle and I to hear about our Tasmanian inspired books. And yeah, I want to repeat that congratulations to Kyle. The Indie Book Awards that he's been shortlisted for in the debut category are particularly exciting because they are voted on by the independent booksellers. So yeah, there's a lot of love there for Kyle's debut novel, The Bluffs. So I was very excited, Kyle, when you agreed to join me tonight. I remember at the start of this year, I accidentally came across your book somewhere on the internet. I heard about it and I was shocked that someone else had set their novel in the exact same location to where my novel was being set. My novel actually got launched about a month later than yours. So, and then I found the cover of your book. It's just so beautiful. And I was looking forward to reading it. And when I read it, I absolutely loved it. So I'm thrilled to be sitting here and having the opportunity to talk with you tonight. I thought we might start by me asking you, would you like to tell everyone what The Bluffs is about?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks, Bianca, for that great welcome before. So, for those who haven't read The Bluffs is centered around the disappearance of a group of four teenage girls who go missing while on a school camp up in the Great Western Tiers. And the reason that this carries a bit of weight for the community is because 30 years earlier, there was another group of teenage girls who went missing in that same area. And it was attributed to an urban legend called the Hungry Man. So that's how the book opens, with the disappearance of the girls. And then we follow three point of view characters as they try to, they each run their own, I guess, rogue parallel investigations into the disappearance. One of those is the teacher, Eliza, who was assaulted when the girls went missing. One of them is the Detective Con, as a Sydney detective who's been exiled to Tasmania, and it's up to him to try and solve the case. And the last point of view character is Murphy, who is the father of one of the missing girls, and also the local cannabis dealer. So the story kind of twists and turns down that journey as each of them try and work out what happened, and eventually they intersect at the end.
Yep, that's a great elevator pitch.
Yeah, you like
I
that?
like it.
I was telling Poppy and Bianca earlier that I have a terrible elevator pitch because it changes every time. But anyway.
The elevator pitch is really hard. So for people who don't know what that means, in the industry, we are told by our publishers that you're supposed to have sort of a couple of sentences that you would pitch your book to someone if you were stuck in the elevator. But it's very hard to actually, you need to be in the elevator of a tall building because it's very hard to put it into 2 sentences.
Yeah. Especially crime thrillers.
Especially crime thrillers. And what was what do you remember? What were the initial seeds of inspiration for your novel?
Yeah. So the moment I decided I was going to write a rural crime, which is a story in itself, I immediately knew that I wanted to have missing girls in the mountain. And part of that was because I'd spent a lot of time in the mountains. Part of that was because I was working in high schools at the time as a youth worker. And part of it was like a homage to Picnic at Hanging Rock, which had a massive effect on me as a kid. And then also there's stories of missing girls down on the east coast of Tasmania, as you'd be,
Yes.
yeah, down through Elephant Pass there. So
Yeah.
I remember hearing about that as a kid, as we're driving down this mountain pass, and Dad mentioned, oh yeah, there's 2 young women went missing on this mountain pass. And I remember as a kid that having a really strange effect on me, because up till then, I'd assumed Tassie was pretty safe. Like, I didn't think anything bad ever happened in sleepy old Tasmania. So that was like, I remember that loss of innocence, that bad things can happen here. And so literally the moment I decided I was going to try and write a crime novel, immediately girls missing in the mountains.
It's funny that you mentioned that because and that loss of innocence, because I feel for me that was those young women that went missing was quite a pivotal moment in my life.
Yeah.
So about 15 or 16 years old when the first woman, which was a German backpacker called Nancy Grunwald, disappeared. She was riding her bicycle on those coastal roads on the East Coast, never to be found. And then everyone was talking about it. And I can remember, people were starting to be concerned. And then when Vittoria Cafasso, who was the Italian traveller who was murdered on the beach near Scamanda, I can remember my mum telling us girls, don't go to the beach alone. And before then, I feel like growing up in Tasmania, it was such a safe place.
Yeah.
And we weren't really, I was never worried about stranger danger or things like that growing up. It was more about, all the beaches in Tasmania are unpatrolled. So be careful when you're swimming. Don't swim near the rocks. Like, I think one of the biggest causes of death in Tasmania is rock fishermen falling off the rocks and getting swept away. So it's all these natural dangers that are in your mind. But it's, when something like that happens in a small community, and particularly with those two women, it was felt that someone must know something, and yet the police really couldn't find any clues. It's unsolved 20 years later. And so it's a horrible feeling to think that somewhere in these close-knit communities, someone actually does know someone's hiding something or even covering up for someone else. So I think that was, that actually provided a bit of inspiration in my first novel, actually.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because it's that Tassie mindset that nothing bad ever happens here except for that natural, like the natural stuff. And I guess that fed into the story of these missing girls, because all through that scrub, like you could just walk 3 meters off the edge of Elephant Pass, roll a body, it'd never be seen again. The Tassie Devils would make short work of it, or it'd be lost in the undergrowth. It's a great, it's horrible and it's tragic, but Tasmania, is a great place to set these kinds of novels.
Well, it's true. And, if you, I think when you write crime, you do have to think seriously about how could you get away with murder? And not that I would do it, but there's many opportunities there. And like you say, you could, a lot of that bushland is untracked, and there are Tasmanian devils. There are a lot of snakes, poisonous snakes. There's things, lots of caves. If you wanted to do something bad and get away with it, Tasmania would provide a good opportunity.
It's a place to come. And because I work in drug and alcohol, and I've worked pretty closely with some very hardened ex-criminals, and I've learned a lot more about exactly how many bodies are potentially in those mine shafts. Or I drove through a town the other day with an ex-client, and he said, oh, okay, I know this town. Yeah, a lot of bodies around here. And I thought, oh man, I don't want to know. Don't tell me.
Yeah, you have to project your sources.
That's exactly right. Now, let me throw it back to you, Poppy. So for everyone watching, Poppy sent me this book, and I haven't given her any feedback yet. So she doesn't even know that I finished it, because I haven't told her anything, because I've been waiting for this moment to say that I finished it in record time, and I absolutely loved it. Especially Joelle, every time her character would pop up, or like her name come at the top of the chapter, I'm like, yes. Oh, and I got that dopamine rush. And I especially loved the that cupcake scene right near the start. Oh man, like as soon as I read that several times just because of the emotional impact that had. And I think it's important to word that up, because as authors, it's really hard to read, especially in your own genre, especially in your own setting, and especially when you know you're going to have to talk about it later, because you can't trip out of that escapism. And so, because obviously part of what reading does is it puts us in a state where we can escape, where we fall into a flow, where we're absorbing the story in real time. And so for me, I was like, okay, this is going to be a tough read, but it wasn't at all. I like flew through it. And so I wanted to give you that feedback face to face with all these witnesses to say that I genuinely really enjoyed this book. So thank you. And thank you for Joelle. And I want to see her again in another book.
Kyle,
But-
my heart is full, and you couldn't have said anything nicer. And we're going to end the evening right now. I'm going to go have a glass of champagne. Thank you. No, seriously though, it's nerve-wracking having another writer read your stuff. And yes, it is. I read a lot, and I read across all genres. But certainly when I'm reading crime or psychological thrillers or things that I'm writing in, I do tend to pick them apart a bit more rather than just relax and read into it. So that's such a lovely compliment that you engaged with, particularly with Joelle.
Well, it was just so nice to have a book that I wanted to keep reading, because I mean, I've got this book here I'm reading at the moment, Mistborn, that one of the podcasts, the So Novel podcast, recommended it, and I'm loving it, but I still don't really want to read it. Like, I'm just kind of like, oh, I've got to get, push through it. But with Vanishing Falls, I'm like, okay, got to go to bed so I can read. So well done. Now let me throw it back to you and explain your novel to us. And
sure.
We'll start with that elevator pitch. Very long elevator.
Very tall building. So Vanishing Falls is set in a fictional town deep in the Tasmanian rainforest. And on a dark, stormy night, the wealthiest woman in town goes missing from her historic mansion. Her husband comes home and he finds the front door wide open, and his antique rug is drenched with the rain. He knows that she's been home because he can see that she's thrown off her fur coat and she's kicked off her shoes and she's left her expensive jewelry on the table next to a half-drunk glass of champagne. But she is nowhere to be found. And so he knows something very mysterious has happened to Celia Lilly. So ultimately, my book is a small town mystery. So everybody rallies together trying to work out what happened to Celia Lilly. But as tensions heighten and people in the small town begin to suspect each other, it seems that everyone has a secret, and slowly some of these secrets begin to unravel. But Joelle is the star of the novel for me. It's never specified, but everybody in the village loves her. Her brain works differently to everyone else, to most people's brain, and that's fine. She is a hairdresser. She volunteers at the nursing home, and she works in her husband's butcher shop. But she has her own secret, and she decides that if she can solve the mystery of what happened to Celia Lilly, that may redeem her for something that she feels that she made a mistake in her past.
That was a good elevator pitch. That was good. I want to read that book.
Is it the same one you just read, or have I
yeah.
off road?
I mean, you missed out. Cliff. I want because he was a great character. I wanted to hear it. I want to hear him mention. Oh man, well, I mean, I work in drug and alcohol, so, but we can talk about him soon. Tell us about the inspiration behind this story. Where was the inception? Why was the inception?
So it's never just one thing for me. There were lots of things. And I started with the waterfall. So Vanishing Falls is a real waterfall in Tasmania. It's located in the southwest, and it comes off a river called the Salisbury River. And as the river overflows over the cliff, it lands in a rock pool, but you can't see where it's draining away. And that's because the water is drained away through these subterranean creeks. So I found that such an intriguing and beautiful image of this Vanishing Falls. And so in my imagination, I relocated the Vanishing Falls to this area, which is near where Kyle has set his novel. So Limestone Creek and Vanishing Falls, they're probably, some of the people in each of the towns might know each other. And the reason that I wanted to set it in that area, there was quite a few reasons actually, and I thought long and hard about it. I was intrigued by Tasmania's very romantic history about apple growing. Mm-hmm. And so that would mean you could set your novel in the Huon Valley, somewhere in the Tamar Valley, or somewhere around the Meander Valley, near Sprayton, that area. They had a history of apple growing. Mm-hmm. I was also, I find interesting the history of that area around Westbury and Mole Creek and Chudley. It's a really old farming area, and it the farm that inspired where I created my Vanishing Falls farm is Old Wesleydale, and that is currently run as a luxury bed and breakfast. You can stay there, but that was a farm. I think the land grant was given in about 1829, and it's a beautiful old-fashioned home with gorgeous English gardens, and it has a fortified barn, which is a barn with really thick walls and narrow slit windows so that they could, shoot at bushrangers or whatever if they were under attack.
That's awesome.
Yeah, I sort of was wanted to push all these things together, and I found that worked best sort of in that area. And of course, the Vanishing Falls works really well around there because of all the caves, and as you have explored in your novel.
Yeah, that's so Limestone Creek, the setting for my novel, is based in the geographic location of Western Creek, which is like right at the base of the mountains. That's where my mum grew up. So it's like a stone's throw from Chudley.
Yeah, it's not far. And so what drew you to that area? Because obviously we'll talk about your history before you got to publication, because it's such a great story. I want everyone to hear it. But it was your first adult novel that you drafted even, so you could have said it anywhere.
Yeah, mainly because mum grew up there, and my grandfather was called upon to do search and rescue up in those mountains.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing stories as a kid about him doing those search and rescue, and how, people went missing and they were just never found again. And there's, back then they didn't have the technology we have, but still it's a pretty scary to know that someone who, especially like the stories about people who knew the bush, like, old bushmen, would still go missing up there. So that's what drew me to that area. Obviously I knew it had to be Tasmanian, and it had to be fairly close to where I live. That area is only about an hour's drive. And it's just a lot about the Great Western Tears themselves, Kupa Aruna Niara in the Indigenous language, are just so, they dominate the landscape. So if you're driving from Burnie to Launceston, you just see them like for half the drive out there in the distance looming. They stretch for like nearly half of Tasmania's landmass, and there's a lot of species on there, mainly flora species, that are endemic. So they're found nowhere else on the entire planet. And there's so many of them up there. It's just, it was just an awesome place to set a novel. And I was so happy to kind of stumble across it, it felt like. So that's why I chose that place. I really liked, Poppy, how you mentioned the history, because that's something I didn't look into at all. Like, I've never had any interest in history. But something that came up in your book was about how you mentioned that treeless valleys don't exist. And then later on, you go into a bit more detail. Do you want to talk about that briefly? Because I found that so fascinating.
Yeah, it is fascinating. I find that interesting. And yes, and then I'm going to throw back to you because you mentioned something too. So one of the it's interesting. One of the subplots within my novel is to do with the colonial painter John Glover's artwork. And he he was a English painter who moved to Tasmania when he was sort of in his 60s when he moved there, and he lived near Deddington, which is sort of just outside of Launceston. And he painted these beautiful pastoral scenes of Tasmania. And in 1835, he sent 68 of his paintings by ship back to England to be exhibited at the London exhibition. And following the exhibition, only 5 of these paintings ever turned up. And so in the art world, from what I understand, when paintings are sold or possessed by someone, that's recorded. And so it was kind of a mystery why these paintings just disappeared. Were they lost in a shipwreck? Were they stolen? What happened? And so occasionally someone claims to find a John Glover painting, because they're worth about $500,000. And sometimes they're found in America or England in a deceased estate or in an attic or something. One of the interesting, so that becomes a plot point in my book, because there is a painting and it gets stolen, and questions of ownership about the painting raised. But what's interesting in John Glover's artwork is when he painted these scenes, the initial art critics said, oh, you're trying to paint Tasmania to look like England with these open pastures. And that's not what Tasmania looked like. They said it was dense forest. But more recently, the art critics have changed how they interpret these paintings, and they say, well, no, he wasn't trying to paint Tasmania to look like England. He was painting it how he saw it. And so it was the Indigenous people who were clearing the land, and that's sort of accepted widely, that they had created pastures so that the kangaroos could come and graze, and that would help them to harvest them. And so that's a theme in my novel, is about history and how we reinterpret it, and how we tell history, and how we change how we tell our history to each other. And something interesting that I have heard Kyle talking about is that when Kyle was at school, they didn't really learn a lot about the Black War and sort of some of these atrocities that happened to the Indigenous people in Tasmania. And certainly when I was at school, that wasn't covered. And it's shocking that can be the case. And there's a debate that sort of gets ongoing, you know, for renaming of things. So like the Batman Bridge, should that be called its Indigenous name? But yeah, it's I feel like we're constantly evolving with how we tell history. And I think in Kyle's novel, there's a very strong Indigenous representation, which I feel like you've just handled so well, because it's quite a difficult issue. But Georgia, the Indigenous character, was a marvellous character. She's one of the teenage girls. And can you talk a little bit about her and how she, how you got inside her head and where she came from?
Yeah, no, for sure. So you've been listening to some of my events. So what there was this moment that happened 3 years ago, 2 years ago. How long have I been here for? Yeah, about 3 years ago. And I was working in a school that was for disengaged youth. And we sat down to run through the new kind of in First Nations curriculum, which I'd never had at all in high school. And we watched this documentary about the Black War, which happened in Tasmania, where the settlers waged an actual war against the First Nations people, against the Indigenous people. And I had never, ever heard of it, ever. And I considered myself a pretty learned man, but yet never once did it come up in my schooling, never once did it cross my path, never once did it crop up when I looked into Tasmanian history. We know a lot about Port Arthur, we know a lot about convicts, we know a lot about bushrangers, but never once was this kind of stuff mentioned. And it's one of the first recorded cases of human genocide in history ever. And so when I wanted to speak to the landscape in my novel, with the mountains themselves are a character, I knew I couldn't do it without, there had to be a strong Indigenous narrative, because I couldn't talk about the country without involving them. But I don't have First Nations heritage, and I was a little bit nervous about how I could tell that story. So I did a lot of research, and the character of Georgia, really, she kind of sprung up in my mind because I guess I was channeling that level of outrage that I had, that no one knew about this stuff. And I was just so embarrassed in myself. That was a main kind of a real emotion I had. I was like, I'm so embarrassed. Like, I was dux of the high school and I still did not know this stuff, like. So I channeled that indignation into her, and I thought, if I was, better equipped and better placed, I'd want to set up some kind of museum to showcase this stuff, to really put it out there. And so that was where the inception for her character came. And so in the book, Georgia she's really passionate about First Nations history, about Indigenous rights, about getting across her people's story. And I'm really thankful that people have resonated with her so strongly, because it's just kind of indicative of the plight of First Nations people, just to have their actual story told and witnessed.
Yeah, I think you were right to include it, and you've handled it so sensitively. And also, I learned a lot from reading your book. I could tell you've done a lot of research. So I'd sort of touched on it, but I really enjoyed reading that that strand of the novel. So yeah, I think good on you for doing it, because it's dangerous times, but I think it's important. It's a really important story to be told, and it was told really well. There's another story I wanted to ask you about, is the what's his name, Alexander Pierce,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how he inspired. Because in Kyle's novel, there's a very delicate balance between reality and mythology, and the characters are very preoccupied with this frightening legend of the Hungry Man. Can you talk about can you tell the story of Alexander Pierce, because it's such a great story, and then tell how that inspired you?
I mean, you're in the back of your book. You've got a much better explanation.
I put that in the Americans.
Oh, did you? Yeah, I loved that. I loved it because once you kind of mentioned, anyway. So the convict cannibal. Should I read it out? Would that be all right? So he's called the Cannibal Convict, or the Convict Cannibal. Alexander Pierce was a convict in a penal colony or penal island prison called Sarah's Island, which is down the southwest coast of Tasmania. And he escaped with some fellow escapees and made his way across Tasmania. And allegedly, he ate some of his fellow escapees to survive. I think the jury's still out on whether he killed them first or whether they died of natural causes. But either way, everyone's pretty certain that he ate them. And there's always been a bit of a legend that he made his way to the Great Western Tiers and he hid out in some caves. And so in the inception of The Hungry Man was directly inspired by that legend, because the idea of some kind of, descendants of Alexander Pierce, the convict cannibal, hiding out in the caves in the Great Western Tiers was something that seemed really possible. And so that's how the history of Alexander Pierce inspired the Hungry Man legend, and added to the Hungry Man legend. But how about you? When did he crop up in your research, and how did you fit him in?
I feel like that story is something that it varies, maybe like in a very small way, but it inspires so much of Tasmanian film or fiction, or the story that you learn in high school, and it's such a scary story. And I think that idea of something lurking in the Tasmanian forest, it just grips your imagination. And so in my book, it's not such a big part of the story, but I did have a fictional little town where Joel came from called Pyman's Junction. And so Alexander Pierce, that was his nickname in the media at the time when he was captured. And I think, you said alleged cannibal, like I believe they found a finger in his pocket. That's what apparently was reported in the Hobart newspaper, if you believe everything that's in the newspaper. Yeah. So, so they called him the Pie Man because that's what he was doing. But yeah, it's this is the Tasmanian sort of Gothic strand that finds its way into much of Tasmanian fiction.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I wanted to ask you, and this is more of a writer question just because I'm very, very curious. Your novel is so beautifully plotted and well paced, and the mystery is so well crafted. But I understand you don't plot. And so I'm just so curious, is how did you create such a well paced mystery? Like, did you have to do a million rewrites at the end, or how did it come together?
I think, I don't plot, but I do write 60,000 words in the wrong direction. But the thing about the Bluffs is, even though it's my first published work, it's the 11th book I've written. And I think by this time, I developed an instinct. And so pacing and where everything fits into the plot comes pretty naturally to me now. I had to work hard for it, but 10 books in 10 years is a pretty good apprenticeship in terms of getting a sense of the shape of stories. But I did do like the first draft, I smashed out in 3 months, and it was unrecognizable from the version we have now. Like the Alexander Pierce's descendant rocks up at the end with a machete, and there's like the girls are tied up in a cave, and one of them, like, they have a Vanishing Falls moment where they go into this rock pool and come out in a river, and it was like a B-grade thriller. And so thankfully it's not that anymore. It's completely a bit unrecognizable. But if I could plot, I'd save a lot of time. I also have a really good team behind me, and I have learnt to have a really good attitude towards editing as well. When I first started down this journey, I was so thankful even to be here, even to have a contract, that I said to myself, no matter what they say, I'll say yes.
Yeah.
Like if they tell me to change every character into a pink flamingo, I'll say yes. And so I came to it with that attitude at the start, even though they asked me to get rid of some characters and to tighten some stuff up. I'm like, yes, I'll do it. And it had this amazing effect of actually being good editing advice and actually working and making the story stronger. So that's how come my twisty plots make sense, is because I have a good team behind me. I come from good writing instincts now, and also, I just happen to write 60,000 words in the wrong direction, and I'm okay with that. I actually don't really mind. With your book, Poppy, you've got, I think was it 5 or 6 point of view? I mean, there's the main 4 point of view characters,
Yeah.
but I think we get a few cameos from other characters, I think. But anyway, how did you go plotting out that many point of view characters into such a twisting mystery?
Well, similarly, so I just write the first thing that pops into my head, and I just follow my heart, and then I get to the end and it's a total mess, and then I've got to, and Michael Rowbotham, who is a famous Australian crime writer, he gave me some advice once, which when he writes, he makes sure that everyone is a possible villain. And so I feel like that's really good advice. So you can write your whole story, but then at the end, I had to choose which person was to be the villain, and then go back and painstakingly add all in the clues. I don't recommend this method because it's really annoying. But I find it hard to plot, and I love writing, and there's nothing I like better than sitting with a blank page and letting the story take you on a journey. So, but I do know that I would like to be a 1 book a year writer. That's my aim, and I believe you would probably need to plot a little bit in order to achieve that goal. Kyle, you have written 10 manuscripts, and then this was your final one. You obviously it's a very long journey. And you managed to get an agent, and you managed to get a publishing deal with Penguin, which is amazing. Can you describe the moment when you found out, got that email? Because it's such a great story.
Well, I was sitting in this exact spot where I'm sitting right now, exactly here. And so I just, my agent, Hayley Nash, had finally decided to sign me after about, maybe a 2-year dance around each other. And she decided to sign me. And then a week and a half later, she says, all right, I'm sending it off to Penguin. And then I get this email come through when I'm sitting here, and it's from the publisher at Penguin. And well, it's from Hayley. It's forwarded to me, and it says, thought you'd like to read this. And then it goes down to the email from the publisher, and the subject heading is just wow. And I'll never forget I can recite the whole email, but just the start of it says, dear Hayley, just a quick note before the weekends to let you know that I have devoured the utterly brilliant and insanely compelling novel of Kyle Perry's. It had me up until 2 a.m. I completely addicted. What a story, what a talent. And when I read those words, having spent my whole life wanting to get to this moment, and having spent, 10 failed manuscripts, having spent, I don't know, like, what did I say, 2 years, a dance around Hayley with this manuscript, to have that email come through even though it wasn't a contract, but pretty sure thing with feedback like that. I've compared this feeling to one of those medieval gates that clang down in like in a movie in a big castle. You got the big metal gate that just slams down. That's what happened inside of me. I was sitting right here, like I am right now, and it clanged down inside of me. But this big metal gate was made of fire, and it went rushed through me. My whole body, like, was ringing, and my ears were ringing, and my eyes were watering, and I could. And oh man, I'll never forget that moment as long as I live. I'll never forget that moment because it was what I wanted for so long. Yeah, and I finally made it.
That's a great analogy, and it is. It's such you want it's something that you want in your heart for so long, and all those hours that you've spent typing away on these manuscripts and hoping and not getting quite where you want to get to. It just makes it all worthwhile. And then from that, from when your novel was published, I think in July this year, it's become this amazing bestseller. I've just saw that it's being launched in Holland.
Yeah. So we've sold into 5. Well, I mean, they've released the cover. It won't be released until May, but we've sold into 5 different countries already. So I don't think no one expected it to sell as well as it has. I mean, like, we hope, but you keep your expectations pretty measured, especially in COVID. But it's just, man, it's gone. I remember the figure my agent gave me of how many we think we might sell in the year. And in 4 months, we quadrupled that number. So it was so cool. But I want to know how you got it. Like, you're sold into America, which is in publishing terms, that's like the golden egg. If you can achieve that, like, you're a master at your craft. So tell us what that experience is like. What's it like being published in America with that? I think you got an American agent.
I have an agent. So I did a master's in creative writing, and when at UQ here in Brisbane, and when I finished, sort of halfway through that course, I'd finished the manuscript, and just as a joke, I typed literary agent New York into Google, and I looked at all their websites and chose one that looked nice, and I picked an agent that I thought she represented some books that I thought were similar to mine, and sent her my manuscript, and that's Julia Kenny, and we still work together today. So I feel like my story is a little bit like yours in that I had 5 full-length manuscripts, and they're not going anywhere. And I sort of never actually believed I would get published. I felt like that was something that happened to other people. So yeah, that when you were describing that feeling of getting that email from the publisher, it's not so much about the contract, it's just about someone validating that you haven't just wasted 10 years of your life sitting alone at your laptop. Which I feel like we would have done anyway, because writers write, that's what we do. But it's such a lovely feeling. So yeah, that's why my books are published in the US first, and then this particular book is published by Booktopia Editions in Australia, which they're new to the publishing industry, and I think they only started. So Booktopia Editions is like a department of Booktopia, the online bookstore. So it's separate to the bookstore. But I feel like I might be one of their first thrillers that they've published. And so far they've been wonderful to work with. I've really enjoyed dealing with them. But I do like working with the Americans. They're quite like doing some of the media stuff is quite fun with the Americans. They, like, I would say, why did you choose my book? And they said, oh, because Tasmania sounds so exotic. And he said, I grew up in Launceston, so you don't, exotic isn't always the word that locals would put to Tasmania, but that's certainly what the Americans think of Tasmania.
Yeah, no, that's good. We're still, I think we're still pitching to America at the moment. There's lots of, I wouldn't say tricky politics, but there's lots of things to take into account when you're selling overseas rights. So hopefully we can sell the Bluffs into America, but everyone, Bianca said before that a lot of the audience who attend these events are writers. So to get into America is massive, absolutely massive. So it's a really, kudos to you, because it's a big deal, and a lot of authors never make it. I mean, a lot of authors never make it to this point, like you said, and we do it because we love it. like I said to someone the other day, yeah, it took me 10 manuscripts. If it took me 20, if it took me 50, I still would have done it.
Yeah.
But it's so disheartening because a lot of hours and not kind of nothing to show for it. I mean, I justify it by, like I said before, I have this apprenticeship that I've done. I've got these instincts. I've got a good foundation, but still, like a lot of time spent doing that I could have spent doing something much more, something that actually affected the world.
I know. That's a question I have asked myself in darker moments. I could have been doing paid work.
Yeah.
But I feel like we would do it anyway, for the love of it. And I think for aspiring writers, it's so important to celebrate every milestone. And I think that includes a rejection from an agent or a, not placing in a short story award or something like that, because every time you complete a piece of work or take that step to sell yourself as a writer, I think that's an achievement in itself, whether or not you get the result that you are after.
Yeah.
And it's just like looking at you, you've got your 10 manuscripts. I've got the first 5 and then I've got another 2. So yeah, just because you get after my first book was published, I wrote a historical fiction set in 1837 on a sheep station in Tassie. Not very commercially viable. But yeah, you still have to achieve, you still have to celebrate all those milestones of failure and success. I think it's important.
Yeah. And I think the more I delve into this world, the more I do tend to come online with that pagan animist idea of ideas as living things that kind of attach themselves to us. So there's this idea that when we talk about characters, right, there's one side of the spectrum, which is that it's purely from our heads, from, it's cold, hard math. And then there's the other side, which says that ideas exist in a dimension parallel to ours. And there's certain people like creatives that we kind of cross over every now and then, and those ideas channel through us. And I'm kind of more towards that side now, having tried to bat out a second novel and struggling because I'm trying to do cold hard math and it's not working at all. So now I'm loosening up and trying to channel ideas like, please come back. But I feel like if you don't honor those ideas as they come, if you don't do anything with them, if you don't listen to the muse, if you don't homage to the muse, then it won't come back. So to an extent. So that's another way for writers who haven't been published yet. What you're doing is good. Like it's an apprenticeship, like you said, it's a milestone, but it's honing your ability to listen to the ideas as they come. So let alone the craft, because I'm a terrible writer naturally. Like prose, shocking. Dialogue, shocking. I had to work really, really hard, which is probably why it took me 10 manuscripts, 11 manuscripts. But I feel like every story we write, we're paying homage, or we're actually honoring that gift we've got. So that's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. You must, you say you're not a natural writer. Well, you obviously have an amazing work ethic because it reads like it was really easy to write. It just flows off the page. It's beautiful.
Thank you. I had to work so hard. So if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Fantastic. I think that is, if that's okay for both of you, I think there's a perfect time to segue into some questions. We've just gotten a last minute flurry of them. So yeah, I didn't want to interrupt you both, but I just thought great conversation. Thank you so much. It's been just really fascinating.
Thanks, Bianca.
Thanks, Bianca.
So we're on the 10-minute mark. So we've had some really terrific questions. So I didn't want them to be missed. So I will fire away if you're both ready. So Cassie has asked to Kyle, are you planning on writing another book with the character Detective Con Badenhorst or Horst? That's part one of the question, and so I'll let you answer that one first.
Short answer, yes. I didn't plan a sequel because I never expected it to blow up how it has. I didn't expect, I mean, you hope, but like I just couldn't, I didn't think it would be as successful as it was. So I didn't plan a sequel. There's no sequel enmeshed in the plot. So I want to write a sequel. I think it's inevitable. I'll write a sequel. And I want to include all the characters. And in order to do that and to do that well, I want to wait until I'm in a position where I can give it proper time, proper effort. So there will be a sequel, but I don't know when. The current book I'm writing is not a sequel. I'm contracted for another 2 books after that. I doubt any of them will be the sequel. But at some stage, he will return, just when I'm really, really sure that I can do it justice.
That's fantastic, and that's so wonderful as an Australian writer just to hear about those that continuing on as well with those contracts, Kyle. That's fantastic. So Cassie's second question to you both is: would you both still recommend traveling to Tasmania despite the events that have happened? I find that quite an intriguing question.
You better answer this one, Poppy, first.
Well, I'm not surprised at that question about Con, because he is such an interesting character, and I wanted to ask Kyle more about him too before, but we did run out of time. But yeah, he's such a multi-layered character, and I would have loved to hear a bit more about how Kyle got inside his head, but we'll have to wait for another opportunity with Kyle. Would we travel to Tasmania with yeah, definitely. Tasmania is a very safe place, and it's beautiful, and it's a fabulous place to travel around, because you're not in your car for more than 20 minutes before you come across something interesting to stop and look at. There's a little village at every turn, or a convict-built bridge, or a gorgeous waterfall. I highly recommend. I'm going down to Tasmania in January, and I can't wait.
I mean, the author, the author public presence of me has to say, yes, you're welcome. But the Tasmanian inside of me, we're very insular people, and we kind of see ourselves as separate from the mainland. And currently, property prices in Tasmania are starting to skyrocket because all these scared mainlanders want to move to Tassie. And so part of me is like, stay away. But no, you're all welcome. Come on down.
Excellent. Okay, so you touched on this briefly as well, Kyle, where your books, and Poppy as well, where your books have been sold into. And you mentioned, was it 5 territories or countries? Helena just wanted to know, is your book available in the UK?
So mine is not. My book has currently been sold. So it's only been out, 6 months now? July. Been sold into Germany, Netherlands, Romania, Estonia, and the Czech Republic. So, and that's pretty good for the first 6 months. We're hoping to sell into other territories. But my next book, The Deep, am I allowed to tell you? Anyway, it's called The it's slated for release July next year. And we've already had some interest from countries like the UK and America into those already. So not yet, but what'll likely happen in book world is that they'll buy the rights for The Deep, and then they'll buy the rights for the Bluffs after that.
Great. Watch this space. And Eleanor would like to know, so Poppy, she says that she knows your book has been published in the US, and she in particular wants to know why you think Americans are interested in Tasmania as a location for a literary thriller. And there was also, and whether Kyle's book will be published overseas. So we've covered that. So I'll get Poppy, if you want to cover the why Americans and Tasmania, that intrigue.
Well, I think it's the remoteness of it, and I think there's been quite a few books this year that have been published that have been set in Tasmania. So certainly, like obviously Jane Harper's new book is set there, The Survivors, and is it The Burning Island by
Jock Sarong? Yeah.
Set on Flinders Island, and Tasmania has a very rich literary history. So I think as long as writers are writing about it, Americans will be happy to read about it.
And Carl, did you have any sort of comments on that as well from your perspective? Because I know, my other hat I wear is in Oslit, and my favourite online exhibition that we have with Oslit is the Literature of Tasmania.
Yeah, I think that it comes down to part of the culture down here is so much slower than up there on the mainland, anywhere on the mainland, really. And so the arts and creativity and writing has a lot more space, I think. I got no evidence like data to support this, but I know that my publisher says, oh, man, we've got so many good writers down in Tassie. Like, what is in the water down there? I mean, we've only got a population of 500,000 people, yet we've got this amazing, cohort of novelists. And I think it's partly the pace, and it's also the natural, like even our bioelectrics are designed to engage in nature. And so because of the natural setting, because of the slower pace, the more isolation, I think just our creativity has an extra edge in terms of Tasmanian writers. And so that lends more to Tasmanian writing, because obviously you write what you know. That's been my experience anyway, chatting with all my fellow Tassie novelists.
Perfect. And then all of us mainlanders want to come to Tassie, and especially us writers as well, and get lots of inspiration. And
But I mean, like, it's just you got the mainland. Yeah, the way mainlanders write about real life issues and people is they just have a better edge than us, I think, because like to me, Hobart is a massive city, but anyway.
I understand that. Well, this is a great opportunity to also expand a little bit more on what you were talking about earlier. So I'll throw to maybe Poppy first, because we've heard a little bit about what you've got in store for us next, Kyle. So what thoughts do you have, Poppy, for your next book, or do you have something already in the works?
Yeah, my agent is reading something at the moment that I've sent her, and it is something I have been revising over the years. It's a murder mystery set in a ski lodge on Ben Lomond.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, someone in the ski lodge is a murderer. But this has been years in the making. But what I'm about to start on, a new project, all my novels have had so many characters, and I actually want to try and do something with only 4 characters, or 4 or 5, as opposed to having a cast of a dozen. So that's just a challenge as a writer. I want to see if I can do that.
Yeah.
And Carl, was there anything more you could tell us about The Deep in terms of I've got one more question after this, so we'll try and fit that one in.
Yes, so The Deep, it'll be released sometime next year, assuming I meet my deadlines. Pray for me. It is centered around 7 years ago, a group of 3, a father, a mother, and a son, went missing off the east coast of Tasmania, down near Eagle Hawk Neck. And then in the present day, 7 years later, the boy has returned. And the boy is the heir to a pretty lucrative abalone dynasty. And abalone is a multi-million-dollar business down here. And so his return kind of sets a lot of things into motion. And at the moment, that's all I can say, just because things might change, but that's the basic premise.
That sounds awesome. I can't wait to read that.
Oh, I'm so nervous. I'm nervous for everyone to read it. The pressure is on.
Yeah, you got pressure on you. It will be great.
You've got your pitch down, your elevator pitch now. I think that was like, maybe a 3-story building there. So.
Yeah, ready. Yeah, people want to read it.
So last question, and this is a really good question from Ruben. And if I didn't mention before, thank you, Florence, for your question before about the next books. Ruben would like to know, what do you both recommend for emerging and struggling authors in terms of resilience?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I need Kyle to tell me his answer, because I feel like whether you're emerging or whether you've published 1 or 2 or 10, I feel like I would imagine that people who've published a novel still would struggle with the resilience. We're creative people, and I don't know that it ever gets easier What advice would you give Kyle about resilience?
Okay, in all honesty, resilience is over romanticized for creatives. We have this idea that if we're just resilient, we'll make it. Whereas it's not true. You need resilience, absolutely, but that's just maybe 30%. You need to be smart. You need to be at the edge of your game. You need to be at the cutting edge of your own change. Resilience, it's definitely a skill you can learn. As a counselor and a coach, I know there's plenty of ways to increase resilience and resilience capacity, and you need resilience. But for me, part of my story, just real briefly, is that I was writing young adult novels for 10 years, 10 young adult novels over 10 years. And it was not until I said to an editor, I said, I will pay you to read my book and tell me why I'm not getting anywhere. Like, I'm getting close, I'm getting really, really close, but not across the line. I will pay you to edit my book and just tell me what I'm doing wrong. And her response was, why don't you try a different genre? And so it was that advice that opened all this up to me. It was try a different genre. I never thought about that. There's this idea of something called the sunk cost fallacy. Or the gambler's fallacy. The more time and money you sink into something, the more you should stick with it. And as writers, and like I can say this because I spent 10 years doing this, you know, I was resilient for 10 years, doing the same thing and getting the same results. Whereas if you want to make it as an author, you need to be resilient, you need to be smart, you need to be open to feedback. Writing isn't like painting or it's a communication. So you need feedback on your communication, and you have to be willing to invest money into it. You need to create space for it. So my answer to that, just if I'm being brutally honest, is that resilience as a word, is this over romanticized. You need more than resilience. But if you want advice on how to stay resilient, I mean, there's plenty of YouTube clips that can help you with that, but just know that if we can do it, like, writers aren't magical people. We're just ordinary people. So if we can do it, you can absolutely do it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, you know, the difference between it's perseverance, and you've just got to stick at it. And there's a reason someone's published 5 or 10 books, because they just kept trying. And yeah, I think just don't doubt yourself and just keep trying. You've just got to keep doing it. If you love it, you will.
If you love it.
Yeah.
Yep, got to have the love of it. And I think the best advice I received was from Trent Dalton and Holly Ringland on a writers event, and that was bum glue. And they just said it's really unromantic, but it's just stick your bum in that chair and write, and you know, just that endurance will pay off. And that's one of the things, I guess, that I've picked up along the way. But like you said, there's many. All right, so we've reached the end of our time. Unfortunately, I could sit here all night and listen to you both, and just, you know, it's just been such a wonderful and wholesome conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Did you have any final comments before we open it up to audience for claps and cheers?
I just want to thank you all. You know, I love attending author events, and this year's been fabulous because there's so much stuff online. So I've seen more authors this year than I probably have in the last few years. But I just want everyone who has, you know, sat down with their glass of wine in front of their laptop tonight to listen to Kyle and I. We both appreciate it, and thank you for supporting Australian authors.
Yeah, absolutely echo that. It's just a massive honor and privilege to have people RSVP and, you know, book tickets and then log on and spend an hour with us. It's just, you know, sometimes it feels surreal. And I also really want to thank Avid Reader Bookshop and Bianca, thank you for hosting us, and Poppy, thank you for, you know, putting my name forward and getting on to me about all this stuff. So it's just made, these little moments are like sparkling moments. You actually, to get a chance to bounce ideas and chat about the craft as though I'm a real writer. Oh man, I love it.
Look, Kyle, I love it too. And talking to you, this has been one of the highlights of my year. So thank you.
Oh, stop it. Thank you.
Thank you. So look, I am excited to also announce that Avid Reader will be opening its doors to some limited number of seats for in-person events coming up. So keep an eye out on the events page. I've sent through the link to that. And also, if you're on social media, just give us a mention and whatnot at Avid Reader 4101. Yeah, it's all about supporting our writing and reading community, and especially with the festive season coming up, we do encourage books and reading time as a great gift. And just thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And we will be carrying on our online events as well as in person. So whether we see you in person or on screen, it's my pleasure. And thank you both. Have a great night. Just going to allow everyone to unmute themselves. Yeah, there we go. So you all should be able to hopefully take yourselves off mute. And there we go. We're going to all come in the room now.
Well done.
Yay. Well done. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Woo!
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Lovely for you to join us. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.